What is up, everyone? We're on day 37 of our Bible in a Year series, reading through the Christian Standard Bible. We are on Leviticus 16 today. 16, 17, and 18 is the plan. And no use dragging it out, so we will jump straight in. Okay. Leviticus 16. We'll start in verse 1 because that's really the best place to start. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of two of Aaron's sons when they approached the presence of the Lord and died. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he may not come whenever he wants into the holy place, behind the curtain, in front of the mercy seat, on the ark, or else he will die, because I appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. Aaron is to enter the most holy place in this way, with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to wear a holy linen tunic, and linen undergarments are to be on his body. He is to tie a linen sash around him and wrap his head with a linen turban. These are holy garments. He must bathe his body with water before he wears them. He is to take from the Israelite community 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Aaron will present the bull for his sin offering and make atonement for himself and his household. Next he will take the 2 goats and place them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. After Aaron casts lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the uninhabitable place." So, think about this in context of us today. If, now this, again, it's a little bit different, and you have to think of this with some nuance, but if you are in a place, and your theology may have you often completely disagreeing with me on this, and that's fine. I think you can disagree with me on this, and you're still a brother or sister. We just have a difference of some theology. But I am a continuationist. I believe the gifts are for today. I believe that you can feel God move. I think that you can feel God's, I don't know what term I would use. I'm used to the Pentecostal lingo. But there's obviously, yes, God is everywhere all the time. But I think there are times you can feel God's presence in a place or a person or something like that. Now, with that, we are able to be in contact with God. We have the Holy Spirit indwelling in us, right? Now, the way that we're able to do that and be in that close proximity is because you still have to have that sacrifice. But for us today, that sacrifice has already been paid. The sacrifice has already taken place. And the sacrifice was Jesus. Jesus is our high priest. We see that in Hebrews. Jesus is our high priest. He goes before us. He made that sacrifice. The sacrifice was him. He gave himself up for us so that we can be in relationship with God. Okay? Now, I'll throw this out too. I've been talking with Adam from Curious Christianity recently. We've talked about some atonement theory and things like that. So I'm throwing out some language that kind of goes with different theories. But if you're familiar with different atonement theory, I will probably be doing a video at some point, hopefully this year, on different atonement theories and maybe some evidence for different ones and kind of where I maybe land. I don't settle on just one. I'll say that. But this Jesus made a way for us to be back in the presence of God, to be in relationship with God again. So this that we see here, the sacrifice that they're having to make for Aaron to even go in there as a high priest, that's already done. Jesus did that for us. And because Jesus was perfect, wasn't an animal, wasn't even a flawed human, he was He was a perfect, sinless man, also God. Fully God, fully man. And he made that sacrifice. So it covers, and this is, it can be kind of difficult to comprehend, but we also have to realize that we are finite beings. And so we don't understand all of this completely, fully. One day we will. I think we will. But here in this life, we may not. So, Jesus, being fully God and fully man, and making that sacrifice for us, covers us in a way that these animal sacrifices couldn't. Okay. Where were we? Verse 6, I think. Aaron will present the bull for his sin offering and make atonement for himself and his household. Next, he will take the 2 goats and place them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. After Aaron casts lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the uninhabitable place, he is to present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice. He is to present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice it as a sin offering, but the goat chosen by lot for an uninhabitable place is to be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement with it by sending it into the wilderness for an uninhabitable place. Fun fact, this is where the term scapegoat comes from. They put the sin off onto this goat, and you send it off into the wilderness. So it's a little tidbit, if you were not aware. Verse 11, when Aaron presents the bull for his sin offering and makes atonement for himself and his household, he will slaughter the bull for his sin offering. Then he is to take a fire pan full of blazing coals from the altar before the Lord and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and bring them inside the curtain. He is to put the incense on the fire before the Lord so that the cloud of incense covers the mercy seat, that it is over the testimony, or he will die. He is to take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it with his fingers against the east side of the mercy seat. Then he will sprinkle some of the blood with his fingers before the mercy seat 7 times. When he slaughters the male goat for the people's sin offering and brings its blood inside the curtain, he will do the same with its blood as he did with the bull's blood. He is to sprinkle it against the mercy seat, and in front of it he will make atonement for the most holy place in this way for all their sins because of the Israelites' impurities and rebellious acts. He will do the same for the tent of meeting that remains among them because it is surrounded by their impurities. No one may be in front of the tent of meeting from the time he enters to make atonement in the most holy place until he leaves, after he has made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole assembly of Israel. Then he will go out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it. He is to take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and put it on the horns on all sides of the altar. He is to sprinkle some of the blood on it with his fingers 7 times to cleanse and set it apart from the Israelites' impurities. So again, I got my coffee. A lot of what we're seeing here shows how much had to go into just coming into the presence of God. Just to have the ability to be in the presence, to be in relationship with God. What all had to go into this? When he has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he is to present the live male goat. Aaron will lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the Israelites' iniquities, rebellious acts, all their sins. He is to put them on the goat's head and send it away into the wilderness by the man appointed for the task. The goat will carry all their iniquities into a desolate land, and the man will release it there. Again, this is the scapegoat. This is where that term scapegoat comes from today, in at least in English in America. Okay, then Aaron is to enter the tent of meeting, take off the linen garments he wore when he entered the most holy place and leave them there. He will bathe his body with water in a holy place and put on his clothes. Then he must go out and sacrifice his burnt offering and the people's burnt offering. He will make atonement for himself and for the people. He is to burn the fat of the sin offering on the altar. The man who released the goat for an uninhabitable place is to wash his clothes and bathe his body with water. Afterwards he may re-enter camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought into the most holy place to make atonement, must be brought outside the camp, and their hide, flesh, and waist burned. The one who burns them is to wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterwards he may re-enter the camp. This is to be a permanent statute for you, and the 7th month on the 10th day of the month you are to practice self-denial. And do not work both the native and the alien who resides among you. Atonement will be for you on this day to cleanse you, and you will be clean from all your sins before the Lord. It is a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you must practice self-denial. It is a permanent statute. The priest who is anointed and ordained to serve as high priest in place of his father will make atonement. He will put on the linen garments, the holy garments, and make atonement for the most holy place. He will make atonement for the tent of meeting and the altar, and will make atonement for the priest and all the people of the assembly. This is to be a permanent statute for you, to make atonement for the Israelites once a year because of all their sins, and all this was done as the Lord communicated to Moses. So this is on the 10th month of the 7th day, so July 10th. Might not actually be July, but for us, we'd say that it's July 10th. Practice self-denial. If you want to stick with this. Okay, chapter 17. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to Aaron, his sons, and all the Israelites, and tell them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Anyone from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, sheep, or goat in the camp, or slaughters it outside the camp, instead of bringing it to the entrance to the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before his tabernacle, that person will be considered guilty. He has shed blood. He is to be cut off from his people. This is so the Israelites will bring to the Lord the sacrifices they have been offering in the open country. They are to bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting and offer them as a fellowship sacrifices to the Lord. The priest will then splatter the blood on the Lord's altar at the entrance of the tent of meeting and burn the fat as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. They must no longer offer the sacrifices to the goat demons they have prostituted themselves with. This will be a permanent statute for them throughout their generations. Say to them, anyone from the house of Israel or from the aliens who resides among them, who offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice but does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to the Lord, that person is to be cut off from his people." So this is I think, God again setting this up so that it is not as likely that Israel will, or someone from in Israel will accidentally, or they can claim accidentally, practicing some sacrifice to another god, right? They have to be in this specific place. They can't do it on their own. They can't, and this is contrasted with a lot of what we see in a lot of this area. People would have like altars and stuff in their house. Like I even know, this is a little different. I used to work a lot of odd jobs. There was a gentleman I was helping one time. We did a lot of laying flooring and things like that. And we were laying flooring in this hotel one time. And the guy that owned it was a Hindu. And we finished it and we went back to where his office was to let him know we finished the room. And he had, I mean, it was a full-on like altar to, I don't remember who it was. I knew at the time. But it was to a Hindu god. And I mean, that's common in a lot of other religions, but Yahweh says no. This is going to happen in this place. Now, that might not be like the only reason, but I think it is at least a reason. Because then if someone is doing it outside of this one location, it's not a oh well, I was doing it a little differently to God, like this is clear cut. You do it here, you don't do it anywhere else. Yeah. Verse 10. Anyone from the house of Israel or from the aliens who reside among them who eats any blood, I will turn against that person who eats blood and cut him off from his people. For the life of the creatures in the blood, and I have appointed it to you to make atonement on the altar for your lives, since it is the life blood that makes atonement. Therefore, I say to the Israelites, none of you and no alien who resides among you may eat blood. So again, I think this is an interesting little tidbit. I know a lot of people have heard before this the tidbit about the life being in the blood of the creature. But when I talk to people, there's not a lot of people that actually are aware of this. I think you can see. No, you can't see where my mouse is. So here in verse 11, where it says that it is the lifeblood that makes atonement. It's not necessarily the animal's death. It is the blood there that makes atonement. That's what is giving the life to make the atonement. Which is, I mean, I think it's an interesting little tidbit. Any Israelite or alien residing among them who hunts down a wild animal or bird that may be eaten must drain its blood and cover it with dirt, since the life of every creature is its blood. I have told the Israelites, you are not to eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it must be cut off. Every person, whether the native or the resident alien, who eats an animal that died a natural death or was mauled by wild beasts, is to wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will remain unclean until evening. Then he will be clean. But if he does not wash his clothes and bathe himself, he will bear his iniquity. Chapter 18. The Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the Israelites and tell them, I am the Lord your God. Do not follow the practices of the land of Egypt, where you used to live, or follow the practices of the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. You must not follow their customs. You are to practice my ordinances, and you are to keep my statutes by following them. I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and ordinances. A person will live if he does them. I am the Lord. I don't know if this is coming up in a question. I won't go too deep into it, just in case it is. But this idea, don't practice what they did in Egypt. That's where they were. Don't practice what they do in Canaan. That's where you're going. I think this is practically for us. This is do what God is telling you to do. Don't follow like historically what your family has done. Don't follow your culture that you're currently in. Do what God is telling you to do. Verse 8. You are not to come near any close relative for that. Yeah, again, YouTube censors. I am the Lord. You are not to violate the intimacy that belongs to your father and mother. She is your mother. You must not have that with her. Also, be just throwing this out there. There is some more of this that comes up. I'm going to censor some of the words for the sake of YouTube, but if you are listening or watching and you have kids around, this is at your discretion on how much of this to let them hear. Okay, verse 8. You are not to have that with your father's wife. She is your father's family. This is actually, I brought this up, I think I brought this up before, but this is brought up by Paul in Corinthians. In the letter to the church in Corinth, Paul makes the comment that there's someone there in their midst that is living in sin. He is being with his father's wife, and best case scenario, that's a stepmom. Worst case scenario, it's not. Either way, it's wrong. It's bad. It's sin, and they are tolerating it. So I think this. I mean, it kind of shows our human nature is debauchery, is wickedness, is evil. This is one thing I do think Calvinists have a better understanding on than most people, is the total depravity piece of that. I think that is something that is much better understood by many times by Calvinists than others. I think there's a lot of people that think that humans are generally good, but humans are generally bad. When left to their own devices, humans do terrible, terrible things. Without some type of a moral code or moral framework, humans do terrible, terrible things. You are not to have that with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's, whether born at home or born elsewhere. You are not to have with her. You are not to have with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, for they are your family. You are not to have with your father's wife's daughter, who is adopted by your father. She is your sister. You are not to have with your father's sister. She is your father's close relative. You are not to have with your mother's sister, for she is your father's close relative. You are not to violate the intimacy that belongs to your father's brother by approaching his wife to have. She is your aunt. You're not to have with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You are not to have that with her. You are not to have that with your brother's wife. She is your brother's family. You are not to have that with a woman and her daughter. You are not to marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter and do that with her. They are close relatives and is depraved. You are not to marry a woman as a rival to her sister and have that with her during her sister's lifetime. So, are you seeing something here? That last one really should have made something pop into your mind. You are not to marry a woman as a rival to her sister. Does that draw back to Genesis? Maybe a rivalry between a couple different ones. We see a rivalry pop up at first between Sarai and wow, am I blanking on the name? Hagar. I was about to look it up because I couldn't think of it. I'm still sick, people. But we saw a rivalry pop up between Sarai and Hagar, right? And then let's get forward a little bit. We see a rivalry pop up between Rachel and Leah. So this is, I think, a good example of how God he used, and then even like Abram and Sarai were half siblings, right? So I think this is showing God wants to use people. People are flawed. So God knows he needs to correct your path. He needs to, and he does this with all people. It is not an instantaneous switch. Like, it's not just an instant thing where you're all of a sudden, like, everything you're doing is right. Now, this is what we would call sanctification. It's a process, right? And this sanctification was happening with Israel as a nation, with Abram as a person, with all Isaac, Jacob, all the fathers of the faith. Was happening with them, slowly progressing and kind of turning to where God wanted them to be. right? And so now we're at this point where God is saying, hey, what they did before, that wasn't okay. Don't do that. So, and this goes forward too. We see God makes rules and laws for things that he does not want to happen. So when we talk about slavery, talk about polygamy, God made rules and laws for how polygamy could happen. He made rules and laws for how to treat a slave. That is not God's giving a stamp of approval of those things. That is God working within a human framework, and much like the Constitution of the U.S. was written, I think, in a way so that slavery would have to one day be looked at. It would have to be abolished. If you would either have to make a choice between abolishing slavery or abolishing the Constitution. I think God worked in much the same way. These things were written so that eventually you would come about to a point where it has to be gotten rid of. And Christianity is largely what did away with slavery. Christianity is largely what did away with misogyny and giving women equal rights and seeing women as equals and things like that. Got off on tangent. Sorry. Verse 19. You are not to approach a woman during her menstrual impurity to have that with her. You are not to have that with your neighbor's wife, defiling yourself with her. You are not to sacrifice any of your children in the fire to Molech. Do not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You are not to sleep with a man as with a woman. It is detestable. You are not to have that with any animal, defiling yourself with it. This is contrary to Islam. There is a I don't remember his name, but he is a leader, and he said that you can do this. You just have to kill the animal afterwards. And you can't sell the meat to people in your own village, but you can sell it to people in the village over. A woman is not to present herself to an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves by any of these practices, for the nations I am driving out before you had defiled themselves by all these things. The land has become defiled, so I am punishing it for its iniquity, and the land will vomit out its inhabitants. But you are to keep my statutes and ordinances. You must not commit any of these detestable acts, not the native or the alien who resides among you. For the people who were in the land prior to you have committed all these detestable acts, and the land has become defiled. If you defile the land, it will vomit you out, as it has vomited out the nations that were before you. Any person who does any of these detestable practices is to be cut off from his people. You must keep my instruction. Do not do any of the detestable customs that were practiced before you, so that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so these rules are written in a way that they are speaking to the men. Okay, most of them are written in a way that they're speaking to the men. I've seen a lot of pushback against the idea that homosexuality is wrong by saying that a lot of these were written not specifically talking about homosexuality, but talking about basically like a power dynamic, so a master and a servant, and a lot of it was dealing with consent, or an adult with a child. I would push back on that because there are plenty of other things listed here. There's plenty of other specific things listed here. You are having to do some mental gymnastics to get to that point from this. If just simple reading a text in context, that's not what is being said. Okay, that is it for the reading for today. Like I said, Leviticus is good stuff. It gets a bad rap. but Leviticus is good. There's a lot of good in Leviticus, and there are some passages that may be kind of awkward to read in a group. But I think, honestly, I think a lot of that we just need to get past and understand that there's good and there's purpose behind having these conversations. So, question 1. What does the Day of Atonement reveal about God's desire for reconciliation and forgiveness in our lives? Again, this is a reflection of Jesus. This is a picture of what Jesus did for us. But Jesus did it at an even higher level, an even better level, right? So that we don't have to. It's not a continual sacrifice that has to be done every year or every time we sin. Like, Jesus paid that debt once for all for a multitude of sins. And even what they did in the Old Testament here that we're reading now, that was a temporary thing until Jesus came and covered all those. Right? Though they didn't get full freedom from their sin by making those sacrifices. I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about, because if they really did, then that means that now we should be able to do the same thing and be forgiven, right? But that's not the case. So it was a temporary thing until Jesus, because Jesus, we see in the New Testament, Jesus was the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the earth. So God's plan before the world was created was for Jesus to make that sacrifice. So, question 2. How do the moral laws in this chapter, or in these chapters, challenge us to reflect on our own behavior and relationships today? I think it is like if you buy a toaster. Okay? Just walk with me for a minute. If you buy a toaster, you're going to use that toaster in a way that the creator of that toaster intended you to use it, knowing that if you go outside of that, there will be consequences. They may be minor. Toaster may just break or stop working. Could be major. If you decide to take a toaster in the bathtub, you're going to have some major consequences, right? So, if that is with something as simple as a device that you buy to toast bread, take that at an even bigger level. Talking about relationships, which is one of, if not the most central piece to Christianity, to human life, not just Christianity even. The person who created those is going to know the best way to do it. And likewise, the issues that can arise are going to be even more significant. So I think it goes to show the importance of keeping relationships in the confines of how God created them to be. And we may not always see or understand why they're supposed to be done a certain way, but that's fine. We can trust the Maker. Question 3. In what ways can we cultivate a lifestyle of holiness in our daily lives inspired by the teachings found in Leviticus 16 through 18? I think it did talk a lot about sexual ethic and morality there. I think it does go to show how big of a deal that is. There is a design for that. There is a purpose for that. And it was made to be a certain way in a certain format. And again, like the answer to the last question, that is even more of a specific and important element of relationship, certain relationships. So the consequences of that and the side effects of that are even bigger and more important and possibly more damaging. So I think it goes to show the importance of that and doing it in a way that honors God, that is inside the confines of how God created and designed it to be. And that is something in our culture today in the West, we have absolutely run headfirst away from. It is not normal by cultural standards. It's not even like doing this other stuff is taboo anymore. At least, like I said, not culturally. It's not taboo anymore. What's taboo is doing things the way that God intended. What's the punk rock thing to do now is to wait until you're married and then get married, have kids, and go to church. That is the punk rock thing to do. That is the fringe thing to do. The way to rebel against culture and society. But I'm here for it. If that's the case, I say let's rebel against culture and society. Alrighty, that is it for today. Again, hope these have been blessings to you. I know these last couple ones are longer. I'm trying to keep them, like I said, around that 20-25 minute mark. But there's just so much in Leviticus to unpack, and there's so much good stuff in Leviticus. I highly encourage you find some good, solid teaching. I may end up doing something just so I can kind of unpack a lot more of this slow walkthrough. But for this pass, we're going a little more quickly and trying to get those done. So appreciate everyone sticking through, watching, listening to the end. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Don't forget to, if this has been a blessing to you, spread the word. Word of mouth is the top way that podcasts spread. So if this has been a blessing to you and you think it would bless others, tell them about it. Show them. They can start from the beginning. They can start from where we are today and just go through. I'm going to do this every single year with a different translation. So, yeah, feel free to jump in wherever. See you tomorrow. God bless.